publication called Hyden Times reported that Annie Guthrie asked her mother Nancy for a loan in the weeks before Nancy disappeared. Nancy reportedly said no.
Finally, that word has been sitting at the edge of this investigation for 3 months. 3 months of pacemaker data and doorbell footage and sealed court filings in a family that has said everything and nothing at the same time. 3 months of a church pew sitting empty on Sunday morning while the woman who always filled it is still missing. 3 months of questions that kept multiplying faster than answers could arrive. And now the results are in. Not a theory, not a rumor circulating on a true crime forum at 2 in the morning. Results: documented, sequenced, forensic, financial, behavioral, a picture assembled from 3 completely separate directions that somehow keeps arriving at the same address. And when that picture is laid out from beginning to end, from the first document signed in May of 2025 all the way to the boxes photographed leaving a $1 million home whose owner has not been declared dead, what it forms is not easy to look at. This is the video people have been waiting for. But before the results, before the convergence,
Nancy Guthrie said no, and 2 weeks later, she was gone.
Before the part that a retired detective described using the word trial, there is a woman who deserves more than a timeline. There is a woman who deserves to be remembered as exactly who she was before any of this happened to her. Her name is Nancy Guthrie. She is 84 years old. She is a mother and a grandmother and a woman of faith so consistent that her church attendance was not a habit. It was a rhythm. Every Sunday morning without exception, Nancy Guthrie was in her seat. The people around her did not need to check whether she was coming. They simply looked for her and she was there. She raised her children largely on her own. That is not a small thing. That is decades of sacrifice compressed into a single sentence. She worked, she gave, she built something from nothing and she protected it with the quiet discipline of a woman who understood exactly what things cost because she had paid for all of them herself. She lived in a beautiful home in the Catalina Foothills neighborhood of Tucson, Arizona. A home valued at roughly $1 million. A home she had been inside for decades. The kind of home that holds a life inside its walls.
The loan refusal did not create a new story. It gave an existing story a starting point it did not have before.
Photographs and furniture and a garden she tended herself in a porch where she sat in the late afternoon when the Arizona light came in flat and golden across the hills. She was not a public figure. She never sought attention. She never wanted any part of the spotlight that would eventually find her. She had a pacemaker that regulated her heart. She took medication every night at 10 o'clock without fail. She wore hearing aids that she removed before she went to sleep, which meant that every single night, once those aids came out, Nancy Guthrie was completely deaf to anything happening around her. Completely unreachable by sound. Completely alone with a silence she could not break through even if she needed to. She was 84 years old. She lived alone. And on the evening of January 31, 2026, she had dinner with her daughter Annie and Annie's husband Tommaso at their home 4 miles away. She went home that night and was never seen again. Hi viewers, here is a question that has been asked across every comment section covering this case for 3 months now, and the answer matters more today than it ever has before. Did you believe from the very beginning that someone close to Nancy was involved in her disappearance? Yes or no?
One word. That is all it takes sometimes. One word between a mother and her daughter. One word that starts a chain of events that nobody can take back. That word was no.
Leave it below right now. That dinner on January 31st was not the beginning of this story. Not even close. The beginning of this story is 8 months earlier. It is a document. It is a number. It is a single word spoken between a mother and her daughter that set something into motion that nobody has been able to stop since. Because here is what most people covering this case have not said plainly enough. Nancy Guthrie did not simply disappear. Nancy Guthrie was the most financially valuable and the most physically unprotected person in the immediate circle of someone who reportedly needed money and had just been told no. That combination, vulnerability and value and refusal, is not a coincidence in cases like this one. It is a blueprint. The family dog had died before Nancy vanished. No replacement was brought in. The home camera system was not actively recording because the subscription had not been renewed. Her hearing aids came out every night. Her medication sat on the counter at 10 o'clock like a signal.
That claim has not been confirmed by law enforcement. It has not been addressed publicly by the family, and it has not been denied. The amount of the loan request is unknown. The reason for the request is unknown. The exact date of the conversation is unknown.
A routine so predictable that anyone who knew her schedule could set a clock to it. No caretaker, no overnight help, no medical alert pendant, no alarm system, $1 million of real estate, 184-year-old woman, zero protection standing between her and whoever came through that door. And here is the detail that refuses to leave quietly. None of those protections are expensive. A camera subscription runs approximately $15 a month. A medical alert pendant costs less than $1 a day. A home health aide through a licensed agency in Tucson runs a few $100s a week. These are not luxuries. These are the basic minimum precautions that families with aging parents living alone put in place as a matter of course, not because they have unlimited resources but because they love someone enough to make one phone call and give a credit card number. The Guthrie family had the resources. Savannah Guthrie is one of the highest paid broadcast journalists in the United States. The combined income across the family was more than sufficient to cover every single one of those protections without a second thought. None of it was done. And that absence, that total, specific, layered absence of every protection that should have existed.
A reason. Not a theory, not a guess, a documented, sequenced, undeniable financial picture that runs from May of 2025 all the way to the morning Annie Guthrie called 911.
Is where this investigation stops feeling like a tragedy and starts feeling like something that was allowed to happen. Nancy Guthrie deserved to come home that night. She deserved a camera watching her front door. She deserved a pendant around her neck that could summon help in 30 seconds. She deserved a phone call before she went to sleep from the people who drove her home. She deserved a morning check from the daughter who lived 4 miles away. She deserved any one of a dozen small acts of care that would have made her less reachable, less silent, less alone in the dark hours when everything that could go wrong went wrong. She deserved better than what was waiting for her when that garage door closed at 9:50 on the night of January 31st Street. And the question of why none of those protections existed, why this woman was left so completely exposed in a home worth $1 million while the people closest to her had more than enough to change that, is not a question this investigation has answered yet. But the financial trail that surfaced 3 months into this case brings that question into a focus so sharp it is almost impossible to look away from. Because the same month that a daughter reportedly asked her mother for money and was told no, is the same month that the clock on Nancy Guthrie's safety effectively ran out. And where that trail leads, what it connects, and what investigators found at the end of it, is the most disturbing part of this entire story. That is next. 8 months before Nancy Guthrie disappeared, someone signed a document. May 2025. That is where this financial trail actually begins. Not on the night of January 31st. Not at the dinner table. Not in the driveway when the garage door came down for the last time. 8 months before any of that, a durable power of attorney was executed. Tommaso Cion signed it. The document named Annie Guthrie as his agent over financial and property matters. When this document surfaced publicly, people with legal backgrounds were quick to offer explanations. Routine paperwork, they said. Standard language for a mortgage refinance or a property transfer. Completely normal, nothing to see. And maybe that is exactly what it was. But here is what those explanations consistently left out. The timing does not exist in isolation. It exists inside a sequence. And that sequence has a direction so clear that once it is laid out from beginning to end, the word routine becomes very difficult to say with a straight face. May 2025. Power of attorney signed. Tommaso gives Annie legal authority over his financial and property affairs. Sometime in the weeks before January 31st, 2026, Annie reportedly asks her mother Nancy for a loan. The request was reported by a publication called Heian Times. It has not been confirmed by law enforcement. It has not been denied by the family. The amount of the loan is unknown. The reason for the request is unknown. The exact date of the conversation is unknown. What is known is that Nancy Guthrie said no. That word, that single, quiet, firm word from an 84-year-old woman who had spent a lifetime building something valuable and was not prepared to hand pieces of it away. That word is the starting point of everything that follows. Every timeline entry, every sealed document, Every forensic result, every box photographed leaving a home whose owner is still missing. It all traces back to that one moment when a mother looked at her daughter and said no. January 31, 2026. Nancy has dinner at Annie and Tommaso's home. February 1, 2026. Nancy is gone. Look at that sequence again. Really look at it, because each item on its own can be dismissed. Together they form something that cannot be unseen. Now look at the numbers. Because the numbers matter enormously in this case. Nancy Guthrie's home in the Catalina foothills sits at approximately $1 million in value. Public record. Anyone can verify it. It is one of the most desirable residential pockets in all of Tucson. A home Nancy had occupied for decades. A home that represented the accumulated result of a lifetime of discipline and sacrifice and work. Annie and Tommaso's home is approximately 4 miles away. Estimated value around $650,000. That is a $350,000 gap between the mother's home and the home of the daughter who lived nearest to her. On its own, that gap means nothing. Parents routinely have more than their children. That is not suspicious. That is just how generational wealth works. But when the question being asked is not about normal family economics but about why a specific elderly woman was specifically targeted, why this woman, why this house, why this level of planning and preparation, the value of what Nancy owned becomes directly relevant. Because the most common motive in cases where an elderly person is harmed by someone within their own circle is not fury. It is not personal hatred. It is not a sudden loss of control. It is access. Access to assets that become available the moment the owner is no longer present to say no. Nancy had already said no once. And here is the part of this financial picture that nobody connected clearly enough until now. The same family that reportedly needed money badly enough to ask an 84-year-old woman for a loan was also the family responsible for the condition of her safety arrangements. And those arrangements were non-existent. No camera subscription at $15 a month. No medical alert pendant at under $1 a day. No overnight caregiver. No alarm system. The family dog was gone and had not been replaced. Every layer of protection that should have stood between Nancy and the outside world had been removed or allowed to expire or simply never put in place to begin with. If the financial pressure was real enough to prompt a loan request, and that loan request was refused, then the question of why basic safety measures were never funded for the woman sitting on $1 million in real estate takes on a weight that is very hard to breathe around. It stops looking like oversight. It starts looking like a calculation. A calculation that left Nancy Guthrie alone, deaf, unmonitored, and completely reachable on the night that someone came for her. Now consider the dinner table on January 31st. Nancy arrived by Uber at 5:32 in the evening. That ride is documented, time-stamped. The driver cooperated fully with investigators. Everything about Nancy's arrival at Annie and Tommaso's home is on the record and accounted for. Think about what was sitting and spoken at that table. Somewhere in the weeks before that evening, a mother had refused her daughter's request for money. The subject may or may not have come up again during dinner. The atmosphere of that meal, whether it was warm or tense or carefully neutral, is not known publicly. What is known is that a woman who had said no to someone at that table sat across from them anyway and shared a meal and then got into a car with the husband of the person she had refused. And that car ride is where the documented record ends. At approximately 9:50 in the evening, Tommaso Cion drove Nancy Guthrie home. 4 miles, roughly 10 minutes, and completely, entirely, without a single independent witness or camera or timestamp to verify anything about what happened during those 10 minutes or immediately after. Tommaso says he walked Nancy inside. He says he watched the garage seal behind her. He says he left and returned home. That account stands completely alone. No neighbor confirmed the arrival. No third-party camera captured the vehicle pulling away. No rideshare record exists because Tommaso drove his own car. The only version of those final minutes with Nancy inside her own home comes from the husband of the woman who had been refused a loan. That is the last documented moment of Nancy Guthrie's presence inside her home. The garage door came down. And then came the silence. 14 hours and 13 minutes of silence from the people who lived 4 miles away and knew exactly how vulnerable she was. From 9:50 on the night of January 31st to 12:03 in the afternoon on February 1st, not one call was placed to Nancy's phone. Not one text was sent. No one drove by. No one checked. Nothing. Not from the household that had just had dinner with her. Not from the people who drove her home. Not from anyone who knew she was alone with no alarm, no caretaker, no working camera, medication on the counter that the sheriff himself said could be dangerous to miss, and hearing aids that came out every night and rendered her completely unreachable by sound. In families where an elderly parent lives alone, the goodnight call is not a formality. It is a lifeline, a 3-second text, home safe, love you. It exists because people who love someone cannot go to sleep without knowing that person is all right. That ritual, that small automatic act of care, was completely absent on the night of January 31st Street. And its absence did something very specific. It created a window, a clean, uninterrupted, 14-hour window during which the only person who could have alerted anyone that something was wrong was a church friend who noticed an empty chair on a Sunday morning live stream and picked up the phone. Not the daughter. Not the son-in-law. A church friend. That is the person who broke the silence. Now think about what was happening inside that window. At 1:47 in the morning, the doorbell camera captured a figure near Nancy's home. The camera then went dark. At 2:28 in the morning, Nancy's pacemaker lost its connection with her home monitoring unit. The pacemaker was still functioning. Her heart was still beating. But the signal was gone. Which means she had been moved. Taken out of range of the device that was supposed to track her cardiac activity from inside her own home. She was alive, and she was somewhere else. And still, 4 miles away, not a single call was made. Annie's Honda CR-V became one of the most significant pieces of evidence in this investigation. The FBI seized it. They held it for more than 40 days before returning it. And that number, 40 days, is the number that every law enforcement professional and forensic expert who has commented on this case keeps returning to because it is not a standard timeline for anything routine. A forensic sweep of a vehicle belonging to a witness who has been cleared takes hours. A day at the outside. The data is pulled, it is reviewed, it is matched against the account that was given, and if everything lines up, the vehicle is returned. 40 days means the data did not immediately line up. Modern vehicles are essentially rolling recording devices. Every door event logged, every GPS coordinate saved, every speed change, every route, every timestamp stored in the vehicle's onboard system. If the account given to investigators was that Tommaso drove Nancy home and returned directly, the car's own data should have confirmed that story within 48 hours. 40 days means the car told investigators something that required a much longer and much closer examination before anyone was prepared to draw a conclusion from it. The FBI has never publicly disclosed what they found during those 40 days. That silence is not neutral. That silence is information dressed up as nothing. And then came the photographs. Images surfaced showing people at Nancy Guthrie's residence loading items into vehicles. Annie's Honda CR-V was visible and present. Boxes were being carried out of the home. At the time those photographs were taken, Nancy Guthrie had not been declared deceased. No death certificate had been filed. No probate proceeding had been initiated. No court had issued any order authorizing the removal of personal property from the home of a woman whose disappearance remained an active federal criminal investigation. And yet boxes were leaving. A true crime reporter documenting this case on the ground asked a single public question. Someone plans to move into Nancy Guthrie's home. Who could it be? The response that reached the most people was brief. Someone who cannot afford their own property taxes. That response spread because it landed on top of 3 months of financial evidence that the public had already been quietly assembling on its own. The boxes gave that evidence a visual anchor. And somewhere in all of this, in the sealed documents and the held vehicle and the photographs of items leaving a missing woman's home, a laboratory in San Francisco and a building in Quantico, Virginia were processing something that could make every other piece of this case secondary. A single hair was recovered from Nancy Guthrie's home. A rootless hair, the most difficult category of biological material to analyze because without the root, the DNA is degraded and incomplete and requires a level of forensic skill that most laboratories are not equipped to apply. This hair was sent to 2 places. The FBI's laboratory at Quantico, Virginia, and Astria Forensics in San Francisco, the same laboratory that contributed to the conviction of Rex Heuermann, the Long Island serial killer whose case sat unresolved for years before forensic genealogy cracked it open. Forensic genealogist Cece Moore is involved in the analysis of this sample. Cece Moore has a documented record of breaking cases that sat cold for decades using nothing more than partial biological material and the expanding databases of consumer DNA services. Her involvement is not a minor detail. Her involvement signals that investigators believe this sample is significant enough to pursue at the highest level of available forensic capability. The first search of the Cody's database came back with no match. Whoever left that hair inside Nancy Guthrie's home has never been arrested. No criminal record, no prior convictions, no history in the system. A clean profile. The profile of someone living an ordinary life. Someone who attends family dinners. Someone who drives elderly women home at night. Someone who signs legal documents and makes financial requests that get turned down. That Cody's result did not close a door. It opened a very specific one. Because it eliminated random opportunists and career offenders entirely. It described someone known, someone trusted, someone close enough to Nancy Guthrie that their presence inside her home would not have raised a single alarm before it was too late. Annie called 911 at 12:03 in the afternoon on February 1, 2026. That call has never been heard by the public. Not the recording, not a transcript, not a summary of a single sentence spoken during it. In the state of Arizona, 911 recordings are classified as public records. Journalists can legally request them. In nearly every high-profile missing persons case, those recordings surface within days of the initial report. 3 months into one of the most covered missing persons investigations in recent American history, nobody has heard one word of what Annie Guthrie said when she called for help. Annie arrived at Nancy's home at 11:56 in the morning. She called 911 at 12:03. 7 minutes passed between her arrival and that call. If blood was visible on the front porch in a location that would have been difficult to miss within the first moments of approaching the house, then 6 of those 7 minutes passed after she had already seen evidence that something was deeply wrong. What happened inside those 6 minutes? Retired Detective Bob Gilliam addressed this directly during an appearance on a podcast. He said there is almost certainly investigative information captured on that recording that detectives have no intention of releasing to the public. He said not to expect it anytime soon. And then he said the sentence that changed the weight of everything. He said the call may not become public until a trial date is set. A trial. That word carries a specific meaning. It does not mean investigation. It does not mean ongoing inquiry. A trial means charges, an arrest, a defendant, a courtroom, a proceeding for which evidence must be preserved and protected from contamination by public exposure. A trial means the trajectory of this case, despite what looks from the outside like silence and stillness, is moving toward a specific legal outcome. Bob Gilliam also raised a question about the content of that call that has not been answered. What did Annie describe when she spoke to the dispatcher? Did she reference the back door? Did she mention the flower pot propping it open? Did she describe the scene with a level of specific detail that a person arriving at that location for the first time, seeing it fresh, with no prior knowledge, would not yet have possessed? In investigations where a family member is connected to a crime, trained investigators listen to 911 calls for exactly one thing. Information the caller should not yet have. Detail that only makes sense if the caller has prior knowledge of the scene. That kind of detail is precisely what gets a recording sealed. That is precisely what a retired detective says will remain sealed until a courtroom requires it to be opened. NBC News built a specific operational protocol for this case. If breaking news about Nancy Guthrie develops during a live broadcast, Savannah Guthrie is removed from the set before the story airs. A different anchor delivers the information on camera. Savannah receives the news privately, away from the studio, away from the audience. That protocol was activated on April 15. Savannah was pulled from the broadcast mid-segment after she had already teased an upcoming story. She returned later without any explanation offered to viewers. 2 days after that she was absent from the broadcast entirely. Networks do not build contingency procedures for cases they believe have gone cold. They build them for cases where a specific moment is anticipated. An arrest, a recovery, an identification, a development so significant that a family member learning of it in real time on live national television is a genuine operational concern that requires advanced planning and a prepared response. NBC is prepared. And then there is Cameron. Nancy Guthrie has a son. His name is Cameron. He is Nancy's child in the same way Annie is Nancy's child and Savannah is Nancy's child. He shares her name, her history, her blood. In 3 months of one of the most heavily documented missing persons cases in modern American media coverage, Cameron Guthrie has not made a single public statement. Not one press conference appearance. Not one social media post about his missing mother. Not one interview, not one comment, not one word spoken publicly in any format. Savannah has been visible, understandably given her professional profile. Annie has been present in the public narrative. Cameron does not exist in this story in any traceable public way. In investigations like this one, a family member's complete and sustained public silence is never accidental. Sometimes it is grief so consuming that public statements become impossible. Sometimes it is the instruction of a legal team that has advised a client to say nothing and mean it. And sometimes the silence has a shape that points somewhere specific. Cameron's silence has lasted 3 months. It has a shape, and this investigation has not explained it. Ed Smart, the father of Elizabeth Smart, appeared on News Nation and commented on this case. Ed Smart is a man who has lived through a family member's abduction from the inside. He understands the difference between what officials say publicly and what investigators actually believe. He chose his words about the Guthrie family with notable precision. He said the Guthries have supposedly been cleared. Supposedly. That word is carrying significant weight in a single sentence. It is not the word of a man who accepts the official position as the final position. It is the word of a man who respects what has been stated publicly while holding open the possibility that what is known privately points somewhere the public statement has not yet gone. Supposedly is not cleared. Supposedly is a door that has been left deliberately open. Now it is time to stack this entire sequence from beginning to end one final time. Because when it is assembled in full, when every piece is placed in order without the gaps and the space between revelations that makes each item feel isolated and manageable, what it forms is not a collection of coincidences. It is a single story told from multiple directions that all arrive at the same conclusion. May 2025. A durable power of attorney is signed. Tommaso gives Annie legal authority over his financial and property affairs. 8 months before Nancy vanishes. Sometime before January 31, 2026. Annie reportedly asks Nancy for a loan. Nancy says no. That word becomes the axis around which everything else rotates. January 31, 5:32 in the evening. Nancy takes a documented Uber to Annie and Tommaso's home for dinner. January 31, approximately 9:50 in the evening. Tommaso drives Nancy home. No camera records the trip. No witness confirms the arrival. No independent source corroborates the account of those final minutes inside her home. His version of events stands completely alone. 9:50 in the evening to 12:03 the following afternoon. 14 hours and 13 minutes. No call, no text, no visit from the people 4 miles away who knew she was alone, deaf to the world around her and dependent on medication. February 1, 1:47 in the morning. A figure appears near the doorbell camera. The camera goes dark. February 1, 2:28 in the morning. Nancy's pacemaker loses its connection with her home monitoring unit. She has been moved. Her heart is still beating. She is alive and she is somewhere unknown. February 1, 12:03 in the afternoon. Annie calls 911. The recording is sealed. A retired detective says it will remain sealed until a trial date is established. February through March. Annie's Honda CR-V is seized by the FBI and held for more than 40 days. The telemetric data from that vehicle has never been discussed publicly. April 2026. Photographs surface showing boxes being removed from Nancy Guthrie's home. Annie's vehicle is present. No legal process has authorized any removal. Nancy has not been declared deceased. May 2026. Reports emerge that someone intends to occupy Nancy Guthrie's residence. Every single item in that sequence can be assigned an innocent explanation when it stands alone. A power of attorney is routine. A dinner is just a dinner. A gap in phone calls is an oversight. 40 days with a vehicle is being thorough. Boxes can be moved for preservation reasons. But here is what this case has made undeniable after 3 months of evidence. When accepting the innocent explanation for each item requires completely ignoring the item before it and the item after it, those innocent explanations stop being the most credible ones. They become the versions that require the most work to believe. They become explanations that only function if the sequence does not exist. The sequence exists. The DNA recovered from Nancy's home is being processed right now at two of the most capable forensic facilities in the country. Cece Moore is working on a hair sample that could attach a name to a genetic profile that the CODIS database has already told investigators belongs to someone with no criminal history. Someone ordinary, someone known. The FBI has 40 days of telemetric data from a vehicle that was returned without a public explanation of what those 40 days produced. The 911 call is sealed and a retired detective has already told the public exactly why. It will open when a trial date is set, not before. Brian Entin reported to Parade magazine in early May that coordination between the Pima County Sheriff's Office and the FBI has meaningfully improved. At the same time, a sitting county official publicly accused the sheriff of allowing personal feelings to interfere with the federal investigation. That accusation was made on record. It has not been retracted. Two different signals pointing in opposite directions. Improved cooperation on one side. An accusation of interference on the other. Both public. Both unresolved. Nancy Guthrie is 84 years old. Her pacemaker is still running. Still recording. Still counting every heartbeat of whatever she is living through right now in a location that only a small number of people know and none of them are talking. That device has been running since the night of January 31st without interruption, marking time, logging data, producing a record that belongs entirely to Nancy and to no one else. She tended her garden. She sat on her porch. She attended church every single Sunday morning without exception because that was who she was and that was the life she had built with her own hands over 8 decades of work and sacrifice and faith. She said no to a loan request. She said no to the caretaker that was never arranged. She said no to the camera subscription that was never renewed. She said no to the alarm system that was never installed. Every no left her more alone, more exposed, more reachable in a home that was worth $1 million and protected by absolutely nothing. The last no, the one spoken in a quiet conversation with her daughter in the weeks before January 31st, may be the one that set everything else into motion. The DNA is being processed. The car data has been analyzed. The 911 call is preserved as evidence for a proceeding that a retired detective has already told the public is coming. The boxes are photographed. The sequence is documented. The financial trail runs from May of 2025 to a Sunday morning when a church friend noticed an empty chair and made a call that the people 4 miles away had not made in 14 hours. To whoever holds the knowledge of where Nancy Guthrie is right now, the window for pretending is closing. The forensic genealogy process does not stop because no one has spoken. It does not pause because no one has confessed. It moves forward on its own timeline, through public DNA databases and family trees and genetic connections that cannot be hidden by silence, and it arrives at a name whether anyone cooperates or not. The results are disturbing not simply because of what happened to Nancy. They are disturbing because of what the evidence shows was planned, what was prepared, what was deliberately left undone. The level of familiarity required to know her routines, her medication schedule, her hearing aids, her camera situation, her dog. The level of access required to move through that night without a single independent witness placing anyone at the scene. This was not random. Nancy Guthrie deserves to come home. She deserves her garden and her porch and her seat in that church on Sunday morning. She deserves to be found by people who refuse to stop looking. And the next video in this investigation covers something that has not been discussed publicly in any detail. The pacemaker data. The specific readings logged between 1:47 and 2:28 in the morning on February 1st. What those numbers show about Nancy's condition during those 41 minutes. What they tell investigators about what was happening to her in real time while a church friend slept in a household 4 miles away made no calls. That data has a story inside it that has not been told yet. Be here when it is.